friends. Hello! We are on chapters 62 through 65 of Thousand Autumns, Volume 3 today, and Volume 3, you are treating me good. Ever since we've gotten into the post-Donghua content, I've been very excited, I've been very elated, I've been very happy, and I would love to wait for your comments. I'm going to react to your comments. I'm going to respond to your comments. I'm going to read your comments, as long as they're not spoilers, and the mod will check. But I can't help it. I have to go ahead and read. Last week when we got introduced to Xiling and Yan, and Yan Wushi's taking a back seat, and Shen Qiao's like, what do I even do? And they're being sent to go find some kind of jade carnelian for Qinggong, and now they're stuck in a sandstorm. It just, done my stuff. I'm so excited. So we are actually going to be looking at chapters 62, 63, 64, and 65 today, which are 4 chapters, quite a few, but it's only pages 111 to 142. So it's like these chapters are apparently short, and it's going to cover the entirety of season 2, episode 1 of the audio drama, which I will be listening to off screen from Treasure Chest subs, and then taking notes, and then coming back for the discussion. But last week was amazing. Last week was so good. I've really, really enjoyed it. Huckleberry and Ruby, they're beside me. They're excited and ready to go. The only comment I have to talk about is Be Happy, who is the moderator for chapters 56 through 58. They were just, glazing Shen Qiao like you do. And saying, Shen Qiao, I can't describe how much I love him, or his character, or his writing. He is just the best. Being forgiving and looking for peace doesn't mean that he can't be bitchy and won't do the dirty work if it comes to it. He just does it with the utmost politeness and class. We should all take a page from Shen Qiao, and when we need to be classy and get the job done, we should just take a page from his book. I think so. But yeah, y'all know that this volume has just captured my attention. I'm so excited. I hope you all are too. There's been quite a few comments for Volume 3 so far. I think we were all ready to get into the post-Donghua content. Usually that's how these things go with Don Mai, but I am so excited. You know what? We just need to just jump right in. I'm ready to go. I hope you all are as well, but we're not going to wait anymore. I waited a week after I recorded, and then I was on a trip with my brother, and now I'm back, and I was like, yes, please, I need to read these chapters. So we're going to start chapters 62 through 65 of Thousand Autumns, and we are going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's dive in. So, chapter 62, the only one in the world. That could apply to a lot of things. The moment he said this, everyone looked over. Sure enough, they could find no trace of the middle-aged man, and the yellow sands before them grew increasingly turbid, whipped into whirling eddies over the flat ground. Visibility had dropped to the lowest. Shen Qiao couldn't even see which silhouette was Qinggong, let alone the middle-aged man. Murong Chen arduously made his way to the front and grabbed Qinggong. He yelled, "The sandstorm is too strong! My lord, please take shelter over there!" Qinggong gritted his teeth. "No! None of us know our way around here. We must follow him closely." Just as he spoke, the sandstorm grew fiercer. Lifting their heads, they could see the yellow sands being blown by the darkened skies. Tears sprang up as sand blew into their eyes, blurring their vision. In this kind of situation, even the strongest of martial artists was no match for nature. They could only wind their scarves tighter, but the sandstorm made it near impossible for anyone to continue forward. Shen Qiao clutched Yan Wushi's wrist in a tight grip while doing his best to hunch over, reducing the force of the wind against his body. Frightened, the horses began to struggle. The moment Shen Qiao's attention slipped, the reins were yanked out of his hands. By the time he looked back, the horses were nowhere to be found. The wind shrieked within his ears, and the haze of endless yellow was all he could see. "My lord, this way!" Shen Qiao dimly heard Murong Chen's words, and he quickly hurried in their direction. But then his next step landed on empty air, and his entire person slid downward. Beneath him seemed to be a bottomless abyss, the sloped walls treacherously steep. Oh! Shen Qiao felt like he'd been falling for ages, yet there was still nowhere for his feet to secure himself. Another couple of moments passed before he felt the incline lessen, if only slightly. With one hand on the boulder behind him, Shen Qiao steadied himself, and then managed to straighten while standing on the slope. Inky darkness filled his eyes. He couldn't see his hand before his face. but this actually gave him a sense of nostalgic familiarity. The wind that had just been howling into his ears vanished, leaving his surroundings as silent as the grave. Except for the sounds of breathing that came from below, rapid yet feeble. "Who's there?" asked Shen Qiao. Those breaths paused, and then after a long silence, they weakly replied, "It's me." Shen Qiao groped his way down the slope, leaping and jumping to where the voice was coming from. "How did you end up down here?" He clearly remembered letting go of Yan Wushi's hand before he fell. "Ah Chao, my arm seems to be dislocated and my head hurts." Shen Qiao took in Yan Wushi's words silently. He already had that crack in his skull, and now he'd fallen from such a high place. How could his head not hurt? Shen Qiao could only walk over to him. "Which arm?" "Right arm," said Yan Wushi. Shen Qiao felt along the arm and set the joint. Yan Wushi gave a muffled grunt, but he didn't cry out in pain. "Wait for me here," said Shen Qiao. "I'm going to go ahead and take a look." But just as he was about to step forward, Yan Wushi grabbed the edge of his robe. "Won't your head hurt even more if you stand and walk now?" asked Shen Qiao. "No," said Yan Wushi. Shen Qiao didn't want to waste too much time on the conversation. He was also afraid he might end up unable to find Yan Wushi if he tried to come back due to their lack of bearings here. "Very well. Let's walk slowly and find Qinggong first." Even though they were speaking in hushed tones, an echoing emptiness still lingered around them. It was obvious they were somewhere underground, and it was somewhere quite spacious, perhaps like a cavern. But those happenings had been so strange and bizarre that they couldn't afford to drop their guard. Uneven stones lay beneath their feet. A moment of carelessness would be enough for them to trip. But these stones didn't seem to be randomly placed. In fact, it was the opposite. When Shen Qiao bent over to touch a couple, he found that they'd been neatly cut, their edges uniform. There were even faint patterns on the surface, a sure sign they were man-made. "RuoQiang," said Yan Wushi. "I was going to say!" His voice quavered, and he did his best to speak as little as possible, condensing the sentence. Is this place the RuoQiang they were speaking of? Into just 2 syllables. Perhaps the fall had given him another concussion. Shen Qiao made a sound of assent. "It's possible." He fished out a torch from his lapels and lit it. The torch's glow was only enough to illuminate a small area around them, but when Shen Qiao managed to discern where they were, his heart involuntarily gave a thump. They weren't standing at the true bottom, because only a couple steps away the ground abruptly dropped again, forming another massive pit of depths unknown. If they'd fallen here earlier, if their momentum had been just a little greater, they'd have fallen into that abyss instead, and who knew where they would have ended up. Right at that moment, Yan Wushi spoke next to his ear. "Ah Chao, I think I saw someone ahead of us just now." Shen Qiao asked, "Did you make out who it was?" Yan Wushi's next words were hair-raising. "It didn't look like a person." "Okay, uh-oh, uh-oh, oh my, that's not good, uh-oh." The flaming stick in their hands made them very conspicuous in the darkness. If Qinggong and his men had seen them, they should have said something. But there was only one path beneath their feet. If they didn't continue onward, they'd have to turn back. "Let's go in the opposite direction then," said Shen Qiao. The path was narrow. Only one person could pass at a time. The firelight flickered as if it was about to go out, yet the darkness was both vast and endless. In a situation like this, the presence of humans became tiny and insignificant, something the darkness could engulf at any moment. Yan Wushi suddenly said, "How did you feel back when you were blind?" Shen Qiao startled slightly, then was silent for a moment. "Nothing in particular. It was fine after I got used to it." "Why didn't you feel any hatred?" Shen Qiao thought for a moment. "I did feel resentment, but not hatred. It's exhausting to hold on to too many things. Of course, there are many people with evil intentions in this world, but there are even more people willing to lend a helping hand. I wish to remember those people, not the things that will only bring me despair and suffering." Yan Wushi sighed. "But all the people I've seen have treated you poorly. If not for you, Qinggong could never have had the glory he possesses today. But not only did he forget the kindness you showed him, he even returned it with further animosity by threatening you into exploring RuoQiang with him." Shen Qiao countered coolly. "They were good people, you just didn't see them." Back when you delivered me to San Jijing, leaving me to no choice but to forsake my own martial arts so that he would perish with me. Bring that up! There was a young Taoist priest at Bailong Monastery, and he just happened to be the little boy we saved outside of Jiang Province's city. If not for his timely rescue, I wouldn't be standing here and talking to you right now. Afterward, HEADPHONE sect came for me, and though the abbot of Bailong Monastery knew that he could save himself by handing me over, he chose to give up on his own life instead. When people like him exist, how can I possibly let myself sink into hatred? Shen Qiao's heart is very small. There's only room enough for good people like them. As for those who don't deserve to be remembered, I won't spare them anything. Not even hatred. Then what about Yan Wushi? Do you not hate him either? If not for the fact that your death might affect the state of both Northern Zhou and the world itself, we wouldn't be standing here having this conversation. Yan Wushi laughed. In truth, you do hold hatred, but you're too forgiving and soft-hearted, so even your hatred doesn't last for long. Ah Chao, your weaknesses are too obvious. That's why anyone can use them to coerce you, just like Qinggong did. You could have seized Qinggong and threatened him into releasing Bana's grandfather. Even that wouldn't have been better than following him all the way here. True, said Shen Qiao, I could have done that. But if I did, you'd have no way of escape. You're saying that I should have just left you behind, correct? Yan Wushi answered softly, no. But I understand why my previous self treated you the way that he did. He's a paranoid person at heart. Someone who'd never trust anyone else. No matter how good you are, he'd always want to bring out the darkness hidden within you. But he doesn't know that you are you. There may be hundreds of thousands of Qinggongs in the world, but there is only one Shen Qiao. Shen Qiao sighed. Now, I really do believe somewhat that you're not him, because Yan Wushi would never say something like that. Yan Wushi said gently, of course I'm not him. I'm Ayan. Don't you have a headache? How can you still talk so much? Yan Wushi went quiet. He no longer made a peep. In the span of their conversation, the two of them had already walked back about 15 minutes, one in front of the other in the back, and the other in the back. Shen Qiao stopped suddenly. The torch, down to its last embers, finally flickered out into the darkness. His voice carried some bewilderment. We seem to have come full circle. At the end of the path was a pitch-black cave, exactly the same as the one they'd seen earlier. Was this place a circle all along, so we only walked from one end to the other? He just said this when someone's voice from up ahead came out. Is that Taoist Master Shen? It was Tuoba Liangji. Shen Qiao raised his voice in reply. It is! Where are you? I also fell down from above earlier. I hit my head and fainted, and I woke up just now. May I ask if Taoist Master Shen has seen our Lord and his men? I haven't, said Shen Qiao. We've been unable to find our way out since we fell down. Did you find anything? There's a door here, said Tuoba Liangji. There seems to be stairs behind it, but it's too dark for me to see. When I fell, my torches went missing as well. Do you have any more? I do, said Shen Qiao. There's one left. They might have each had their own goals and sides, but they were in a cooperative relationship at the moment, and if they wanted to break through, they'd have to work together. Shen Qiao lit a torch and walked over. Sure enough, Tuoba Liangji was waiting for them at the cavern entrance. As they came closer, it was easy to see the large bloodstain on his forehead. Did you find any other passages earlier? No, said Shen Qiao. Then it seems that we can only try going down. Right at this moment, Shen Qiao suddenly saw a hairy hand materialize behind Tuoba Liangji. It had 5 fingers tipped in reddened nails. I was about to land on Tuoba Liangji's shoulder. The thing that had approached so silently that they actually failed to notice it. He had no idea whether it was even human. Before Shen Qiao could even open his mouth, Tuoba Liangji too sensed something wrong. He turned and abruptly thrust his sword at it. But the sword didn't pierce the newcomer's body. Instead, as if it had encountered an iron wall, the tip of the sword actually bent a little. Tuoba Liangji retreated at top speed. Shen Qiao shoved the torch into Yan Wushi's hand and drew Shan He Tongbei while rushing forward. The thing was tall and heavy set. It didn't look like anyone from the entourage. Shen Qiao remembered Yan Wushi's suggestion that it wasn't human, and he didn't dare be reckless. He channeled true chi into his sword, causing it to glow a faint white. Even if the newcomer was a bronze or iron wall, the thrust would be enough to pierce through. But though that monster looked clumsy, it was actually incredibly agile. Jumping left to right, it managed to evade Shen Qiao's sword. It seemed entirely focused on Tuoba Liangji as it spread its fingers and grabbed at him. Now that he was close to it, Shen Qiao could feel a heavy stench strike him in the face. The monster's body was covered in hair, and its eyes shone a dim green. It looked like an ape. Everything happened in the span of a blink. Tuoba Liangji had thought that Shen Qiao would take the most of the pressure off him. He didn't expect the creature's relentless pursuit as it pounced on him. To his right was a bottomless abyss. Behind him was Yan Wushi. There was no space to dodge, so he could only clamber to the wall on his left. With a couple of leaps, he was already several yards off the ground. But the ape continued to chase him, and even followed him up the wall at top speed, even greater than him. Then the martial arts, it was just about to grab Tuoba Liangji, who leapt to the side and down, but then he did something Shen Qiao could never have expected. He reached out towards Yan Wushi, preparing to grab him and toss him at the ape, thus extricating himself from the situation. But his hand missed as he extended forward, and he caught nothing but empty air. What? Chapter 63. Several Yan Wushis. Several? What? The ape pounced atop Tuoba Liangji, and together they fell into the abyss. Only Tuoba Liangji's shocked cry lingered, echoing through the empty space around them. Yan Wushi, who'd almost become a human shield courtesy of Tuoba Liangji, was currently pressed against the stone wall as he gasped. His face was as pale as a ghost, and the flickering, feeble firelight seemed to suffuse it in an almost apathetic, stony coldness. Shen Qiao breathed a sigh of relief, and then he went up to take his pulse. "Are you all right?" Yan Wushi stiffened a little at first, but soon relaxed and let him press down on his wrist. Shen Qiao's brows were tightly pinched, and it wasn't due to his reaction. "Why is your true qi growing increasingly chaotic? It's like brawling within your body." Yan Wushi said, "I used my true qi just now." Shen Qiao could hear just how exhausted and spent he was from those couple of words. It was a shock. Before he could react, Yan Wushi was already collapsing towards him, his entire body falling against Shen Qiao. Shen Qiao was forced to catch him. Unprepared for the icy cold of his skin, Shen Qiao jolted, shuddering. The situation was a little similar to what had happened in Qin during Yan Wushi's qi deviation after dueling RuoQiang. And the seeds of his current illness had also been planted that day. Yan Wushi was trembling as well. It made him unconsciously try to press closer to Shen Qiao, wanting to draw some warmth. Due to what happened last time, Shen Qiao didn't dare to pass true qi to him carelessly. "How are you feeling? If you can't walk, let's rest here for a moment first." Yan Wushi forced two words out through gritted teeth. "Let's go." Shen Qiao sighed. He bent at the waist and pulled Yan Wushi onto his back, then walked towards the cavern exit using his sword as support. Sect leader Yan, who had once been unrivaled throughout the Xionghu, who disdained all great heroes as unworthy, had probably never dreamed that he'd see such a day. They didn't have any torches left, but before the last one died, Shen Qiao had indeed spotted stairs behind the cavern exit. They were incredibly steep, but the existence of stairs meant that people had once lived down there in the past. Most likely it was that the ancient city of RuoQiang that Qin Gong was looking for waited there. The man on Shen Qiao's back continued to shiver, but his will was so strong he refused to let out a single moan. The ape that had attacked them earlier must have lived there for a long time. It had grabbed Tuoba Liangji and fell down with him. So did that mean that below them wasn't the bottomless abyss that they'd imagined, but a passage leading somewhere else? Shen Qiao walked down the stairs step by step, thinking as he went. Yan Wushi said hoarsely, "I'm not a Yan." Shen Qiao grunted in reply, "I know." The man's expression when he'd watched Tuoba Liangji fall, and the way he'd reacted when Shen Qiao touched his gate of life was enough to tell Shen Qiao that the personality within Yan Wushi's body had changed again. After interacting with him for several days, Shen Qiao had roughly inferred what was going on. One of the personalities was his original one, which he tentatively referred to as Yan Wushi. Another one was the one who called him Mirengege, Jiling. Though his personality was somewhat innocent, his guard was just as high, and he disliked speaking. However, he trusted Shen Qiao, probably because Shen Qiao had been the first person he'd seen upon waking up, or perhaps because he could sense that Shen Qiao didn't have any malice. In any case, Jiling did anything he was told to do, which made dealing with him fairly painless. The real Yan Wushi would never do something like that. And the last personality was the one who'd been conversing with him earlier. This personality was a much milder temper, and you could discuss some things with him. Out of all of Yan Wushi's personalities, he was the easiest to get along with. Shen Qiao asked, "Then who are you right now?" But Yan Wushi's answer was paradoxical. "I'm him, but I'm also not him." The true qi within his body was rampaging, so he must have been in extreme agony at this moment. But if he didn't want to focus on the pain, he could only distract himself by talking. "So you aren't Yan Wushi or Ling or Ayan?" "I don't know. My head is a mess. Sometimes I'll recall certain things. Sometimes I feel like those things didn't actually happen to me. Maybe I don't even know those things I did just a moment ago." Shen Qiao was already used to this kind of situation. "Once we find the Jade Sistanch, your situation should take a turn for the better." The Jade Sistanch can only heal external injuries. It's ineffective against the internal ones. "Then what must you do to fully recover?" "Wait until I patch the flaw in the Fanglan scriptures." "Didn't you say that that's impossible to repair the flaw in the demonic core?" Tinged with surprise, Shen Qiao's voice echoed down the passage. Yan Wushi couldn't remember much at the moment, but he still recalled how he had treated Shen Qiao. How, when he'd personally delivered him to Song Jijing, he had almost been able to see Shen Qiao's heart withering within his eyes. How Shen Qiao had said to him, "The reason I'm met with betrayal after betrayal isn't because I'm naive, it's because I believe that kindness will always exist. If there were no fools like me, where would Sect Leader Yan find your pleasure?" And it hadn't been long since then. Just how had Shen Qiao felt when he'd faced him anew? "I've already found the method," he said coolly. There was still a hint remaining warmth within his chest, left there by Ling and Ayan, from the feelings whenever they thought about Shen Qiao. But at this moment, Yan Wushi forcefully wiped it away, and his gaze fell short distance in front of Shen Qiao. "Someone's there," he said. At practically the same moment, Shen Qiao stopped. He had also heard it, that fleeting yet heavy sound of breathing. "Who's there?" Shen Qiao asked. In the darkness, a pair of glowing green eyes shone like ghost fire lamps, suspended in mid-air as they stared at the two. At the same time, the thick, heavy stench of blood sprang through the area. The ancient city of RuoQiang, decrepit and neglected for ages, was indeed full of dangers. Oh, really? Oh, that was a short-ass chapter. Okay, that was a short chapter. Okay, oh my god. Okay. Chapter 64, Exhausted. Shen Qiao stood still and didn't move. The other party didn't approach either. The two of them stared each other down in a stalemate, making for a rather eerie atmosphere. Shen Qiao had already seen those dim green eyes on the other apes, so seeing them again didn't come as much of a surprise. He only thought it somewhat strange. Why are there so many apes in this desolate, sealed-off ruin? Could they really survive down here for hundreds of years without any food or water? Watching Shen Qiao bide his time, showing no signs of rashness, the eyes couldn't restrain themselves any longer. They flashed briefly in the dark, and then the green glow faded, and everything was engulfed in darkness once more. The stench of blood quickly faded as well, disappearing into the distance. It had left just like that? The stairway was incredibly long, and as Shen Qiao groped along the walls, he found that they were more or less all carved on both sides with engravings. It was clear that this had been a flourishing city in the past. After Lolan annexed RuoQiang, the country had disappeared from historical records, together with all of its people and countless treasures. Perhaps Lolan had plundered it all, or perhaps it had just been buried and lost to time. In any case, the slow flow of history had nothing to say about them anymore. Step by step, Shen Qiao descended the stairs while carrying Yan Wushi. Within the expansive, far-reaching darkness, his pace seemed to slow, each step stretching out infinitely. Because of his injuries, Yan Wushi was unable to suppress his breathing, which made his breath sound somewhat heavy as they lingered by Shen Qiao's ear, together with the faint puffs of hot air. That there were sounds of Shan Tongbi as it tapped against the ground, probing out a path. It all gave Shen Qiao the illusion that the staircase was a never-ending one. Since there was no end to it, why not stop and rest for a moment? No matter how much further they walked, they wouldn't be able to leave anyway. Suddenly, he felt an icy coldness against his nape. Yan Wushi's hand had touched him there, and Shen Qiao couldn't help but shudder. The place had been stale and airless for many long years. Staying here for an extended time would cause someone to feel stifled. Their minds would grow dull, and they'd become dazed and lethargic. Just before, Shen Qiao's mind had been completely focused on the ape. His attention had slipped and he'd almost fallen into that trap. "Many thanks," he said. Yan Wushi didn't reply. Shen Qiao was already used to this. The true qi of Yan Wushi's body was in disorder. He couldn't even control himself and was constantly switching between personalities. The current one probably didn't like to talk. The two of them walked some distance when suddenly Shen Qiao felt the stairs beneath him had disappeared, only to be replaced by flat ground. The walls on either side of the staircase had also vanished, but this only made his more discomforted, as he had no idea just how large this open space was, nor what traps might suddenly spring up beneath his feet. A sword soundlessly thrust toward Shen Qiao's face. The blade, as cold as autumn water, didn't even glint within the darkness. But Shen Qiao had stayed in the dark for a long time. He was accustomed to using his ears to discern everything, and they were exceptionally sensitive. The sharp blade point was still a mere inch from his eyes, but he'd already leapt into the air, sweeping backward with his sword across his chest. With a loud clank, the attack was dissipated. Before Shen Qiao could speak, the other party began questioning him. "What demon goes there? Tell me your name!" Finding the situation awkward, Shen Qiao countered, "And who is this distinguished gentleman?" Oh my god, Shen Qiao, seriously. Whoever it was, they managed to recognize his voice. "Taoist Master Shen." "And you are?" asked Shen Qiao. "I'm Chu Ping," said the man. "I came together with our lord." Qin Gong had brought around a dozen men with him. Other than the likes of Rongchen, whom Shen Qiao already knew, Shen Qiao had almost no interactions with the rest of them. Shen Qiao made a sound of assent. "Well, where's Qin Gong?" "My lord and the others are in front of us. Just now a monkey-like monster carried off 2 of our men, and so I thought you were also... Forgive my rudeness. Please come with me, Taoist Master Shen." His voice was shaking with fear, and he was panting as he spoke. It was evident that he'd just gone through a treacherous battle. "Are there any traps here?" asked Shen Qiao. "No," said Chu Ping. "This place is mostly... It should have been a terrace, but we'll be turning a corner just up ahead. My lord and the others are right beyond that corner." Shen Qiao used the sound of Chu Ping's footsteps to discern the direction they were heading and followed after him. After walking for a while, he heard someone ahead of them say, "Who is it?" "It's me, Murong Patriarch," said Chu Ping. "I found Taoist Master Shen and his friend." Murong Chen's voice sounded a little strained. "Well, hurry over here." Chu Ping grew nervous as well. "What happened? Did that monkey return?" Oh. Murong Chen didn't respond. Then there was a hiss in the dark, and a flame burst to life above his hand. With the help of the firelight, Shen Qiao could now see that there were other people standing beside Murong Chen, but their numbers had decreased from before. Upon seeing Shen Qiao and Yan Wushi, an expression of relief washed over Qin Gong's face. "Oh, I'm glad the 2 of you are fine. What happened here?" asked Shen Qiao. "The gale blew away the sand and revealed a deep pit, which led down to RuoQiang's ancient city, so we dropped down. However, this place is quite large, and we didn't all drop down together, so some of our men got separated." "Then where should we go now?" Qin Gong answered each of his questions. "We just scouted the area. If our guess is correct, we should be inside the walls of the original city. Jade Sistanch grows underground, so we must find the passage that leads before the ground within the city and then continue down from there. This city has been buried beneath the sand for hundreds of years," Shen Qiao pointed out. "Even if there were a passage, it's probably been blocked for a long time. We might not be able to find it even after consuming all of our supplies." "No need to worry," says Qin Gong. "Before coming here, I saw a rough depiction of the city layout from RuoQiang's time, so I have some idea of where the passage might be. Back then, RuoQiang's people constructed an altar on the north side of the capital. The passage should be beneath it, so we only need to find that northern altar. There are some monsters here. You may have met them earlier. Likely a kind of ape that's been dwelling here for a while. They have sharp eyes and ears, and they're used to the dark. Their physical capabilities are comparable to those of martial artists, so we must be careful so as not to repeat our mistakes." He hadn't only said these words for Shen Qiao. They were more directed to the subordinates with him, probably because they'd lost a couple of people earlier. The men immediately agreed in unison. Then, with Murong Chen leading the way, they followed the fire glow deeper inside. Their increased numbers gave everyone a sense of security, and they were suddenly much more at ease, especially now that Shen Qiao had joined after them. After they personally witnessed how he'd been a match for both Dao Yanshan and Ui together, their hearts had all placed him in the ranks of first-rate martial artists. Currently, few people knew of Kunie's death. Once this news spread, likely no one would dare look down upon Shen Qiao anymore. The Zhonghu was simply that pragmatic. Concealed beneath the lofty sentiments and ideals, beneath the blades, were the same beliefs as everyone else. Survival of the fittest, and the strong were king. The apes hiding low in the dark also seemed to fear their numbers, for none came out, and they traveled smoothly for quite a while. Logically speaking, since RuoQiang was a small country even before its destruction, the capital couldn't be that large either. The distance they'd walked should have been more than enough to take them from the south side of the city to the north. Though everyone had their doubts, considering the gap in social status, they dared not to recklessly question Qinggong. Only Shen Qiao asked, how much longer will it be? Qinggong was also a little uncertain. After all, what he'd seen inside the imperial palace of Qi was only an incomplete map left behind by the Han dynasty. We should almost be there. However, no sooner than he said this, someone within their group suddenly called out quietly, Liu Long has disappeared! Soon after was another shout of surprise, what is this? To conserve their torches, Murong Qin was the only person who'd lit one. Before he could shine it over, someone was already fumbling about his lapels, trying to light another one, perhaps due to his panic, but his trembling hands dropped the torch and it fell to the ground, right to the ground. Murong Qin rushed over and directed his firelight at the ground. On top of the torch that had just fallen was a hairy spider. Its entire body was dark and gray, and even excluding its legs, it was the size of a full-grown man's palm. 3 white stripes marked its back, giving the impression of a person with their eyes closed. Once the spider began to crawl, the eyes opened as if it were blinking. Nope! None of them had ever seen something so eerie! They weren't scared exactly, but they all felt indescribably disgusted, and their hair stood on end. Someone couldn't take it anymore, and swung a sword at the spider, slicing it right in half. However, as soon as it did, more baby spiders burst out of its abdomen, one after the other, and they all crawled towards the men's feet. Liu Long! It's Liu Long! Someone had lit up a new torch. As the light it cast flickered across a spot not far away, they saw a corpse collapse there, still wearing familiar robes. But the body itself was shriveled, the skin stretched tightly over the bones. It was horrific. Don't let those things close, yelled Murong Qin. He unsheathed his sword as he spoke, and a couple of sword glares flashed, instantly killing all the spiders that had been crawling towards him and Qinggong. But the others weren't so lucky. Oh my God. The baby spiders crawled at an astonishing speed, climbing up their feet and legs. Ah, hell no. They slipped into any crevice they could find, and the moment they touched warm skin, they injected their venom and paralyzed its victims. The victims didn't feel anything even as their blood was sucked dry. They couldn't even make a sound. In the blink of an eye, 2 or 3 more men collapsed. As lackeys responsible for odd jobs ran back and forth for Qinggong, they only knew a couple of moves and were completely unable to react in time. Like Liu Long, they fell silently to the ground. The others were horrified. They dared not to be careless anymore. They all drew their weapons and began hacking at the spiders, but the spiders were too small, and they continued to pour from some unknown source. The surrounding darkness combined with their nervousness meant it was easy to overlook some. And when they sliced open a couple of large ones, more small ones would crawl out. It was impossible to kill them all, and impossible to guard themselves completely. The only exception was Shen Qiao, standing beneath Shanhei Tongbei's sword screen. No spiders approached him, and he kept Yan Wushi shielded behind him. His sword she wrapped around them watertight, a white waterfall within the darkness, so brilliant and dazzling no one could look away. The spiders targeted the weak and feared the strong. When they realized they couldn't get close to Shen Qiao, they all turned around and surged towards the others. Qinggong angrily lambasted his men. Well, don't pierce their abdomens. Use fire. Burn them with fire. Kill it with fire. He kept himself occupied as well, a sword in one hand and a torch in the other as he swung it towards the ground. The spiders were afraid of the firelight and dared not to come closer. He took the opportunity to burn some, but the torches were limited. As he watched the spiders rush forth in endless waves, crawling over several of his men who had already fallen, Qinggong was forced to command the remaining men, "Run forward!" But when it rained, it poured. Right at that moment, everyone felt a cool breeze blowing behind them. Before they could react, someone screamed while collapsing forward. "The demon monkeys!" Someone yelled white with terror. "The demon monkeys are back!" Caught between a rock and a hard place, they couldn't even run as they wanted to. In their panic, they subconsciously gathered where Murong Qin and Shen Qiao were, for those two were the strongest of their group. So far, they'd been handling out the situation with ease, completely unscathed. But things weren't easy for Shen Qiao either. 2 apes leapt towards him at the same time. He had to deal with the spiders in front of him while taking on the 2 apes, and he needed to protect Yan Wushi as well. Forced to juggle 3 things at once, he could barely keep up. It was exactly like Qinggong had said. Having lived in the dark for a long time, the apes had developed night vision. Like cunning hunters hiding in the shadows, they coldly watched as the spider's assault drove everyone into a panic and then took the best opportunity to attack, wanting to fell them in a single blow. The clang of weapons sounded incessantly, but many of them realized that whenever they thrust out their swords, it seemed as if they were able to pierce right through the creature's chests. They'd either be blocked by the hand, steely hide behind the ape's fur, or the apes would evade at the last moment. They had to worry about those blood-sucking spiders while dealing with the tireless apes, and within a couple of rounds they were thoroughly exhausted from the fighting, their bodies all sporting various injuries. The nails of those apes seemed to be tipped with a kind of poison as well, for the cuts they left behind began to burn with pain. Yan Wushi suddenly spoke up. The apes are the spiders' natural enemies. The moment they appeared, the spiders retreated. His voice was weak and hoarse, devoid of his old arrogance that proclaimed that everything was beneath his concern. But there was a strange power in his words. The moment he spoke, everyone found themselves listening to him attentively. Everyone who heard what he said froze. In what little time they could spare while fighting the apes, many of them looked at the ground. Indeed, those disgusting spiders had all vanished. Without the spiders hampering them, it was as if a huge load had been lifted, and everyone's spirits rose immediately. For a time, true chi flooded forth, while swords swept up gusts of winds, forcing the apes to retreat a couple of paces. But it didn't last long. A loud, drawn-out howl rose in the darkness, like a woman's wailing, and the apes' attacks grew fierce once more. Some of them pounced forward despite being wounded by the sword's true chi, as if ready to fight to the end. Shen Qiao said to Yan Wushi, "That should be the apes' leader commanding them. We must capture it or we'll have no peace. Go hide by RuoQiang. I'll go look for the leader. I probably won't be able to protect you for a while." Yan Wushi grunted in assent but said nothing else. After all, the two of them had never been friends in the first place. Of course, they couldn't be considered enemies now, but while Yan Wushi's current personality might be different from the original one, it was just as callous. If he'd told Shen Qiao something like, "Be careful," that would have surprised him more. He watched as Yan Wushi pressed himself against the cavern wall and quickly vanished into its protruding cracks. The apes wouldn't be able to find him for now. Then Shen Qiao leapt up the wall, using those jutting rifts as footholds. Within a few ups and downs, he vaulted towards the source of the howl and quickly slipped into the darkness. Shen Qiao's Taoist robes fluttered as he landed, light and agile, sword in hand. Under the broad daylight, he would have appeared full of immortal poise and drawn countless eyes. Unfortunately, in this place, everyone could barely look after themselves. Only Yan Wushi sent a keen look at his disappearing figure. Then, instead of going to Qinggong and Muronqin for protection like Shen Qiao had told him to, he circled around everyone and went further into the darkness. No one noticed his disappearance, least of all Shen Qiao. His eyes were closed as he used his ears to discern the leader's location, but ever since that scream, it had made no sound. So Shen Qiao could only grope forward based on his impressions. The clanging of weapons from below grew further and farther away. Shen Qiao held his breath as he melded into the ruins and broken tiles behind his back. There he could keenly feel the endless quiet and unknowns brought by the darkness. Suddenly, the scream rang out again. It was long and mournful, before suddenly turning shrill like a bugle call or an alarm. Below them, the herd of apes once again began attacking Qinggong and his men in a frenzy. Well, now was the time. Clang! With a cry like a fledgling phoenix, Shan Tongbei sprang from its sheath. Shen Qiao pushed off the ground and leapt into the darkness. There was no support to be found within the dark, but he glided through the air. This strike of his wasn't flashy in the slightest, but it was impossibly fast. His sword glare seemed to engulf him completely, turning him into a white arc as he swept through the void. Tinged with purple as if heralding a propitious result, it shot straight towards the source of the sound. The sword glare surged as it traveled. The ape was a living creature, so naturally it must have sensed the danger. But it was the leader, the ruler of this ancient ruin, and had commanded absolute power for so long. When it saw that someone dared to challenge its authority, its first instinct wasn't to run, but to pounce at Shen Qiao in a rage. With it illuminated by the sword glare, Shen Qiao realized that the ape in question was different from the rest. It had the face of a man. Even more unsettling were the pair of flashing green eyes within that hairy human face, glaring balefully at Shen Qiao. Its claws carried the stench of blood along with another strange, unidentifiable smell. It completely ignored Shen Qiao's sword glare and slammed upon him like a mountain crashing down. Shen Qiao suddenly realized what the smell was. It was the smell of the spiders released as they lay dead on the ground. Having lived for so long underground and lacking any other food source, they must have fed on the spiders, and over time, they became the spiders' natural enemies. That was why the spiders had all fled the moment they appeared. But to the apes, the sudden appearance of so many people was a huge new food source. This drew them over, and they began their relentless pursuit. The ape had no idea of the sword glare's power. It thought its hide tough like bronze and iron, so it fearlessly swiped at him, the attack so ferocious and carrying the same reek. If that blow had scored a solid hit, Shen Qiao's brains would have definitely splattered all over the ground. The two clashed head on. Wrapped in true chi, the sword glare tore the ape's skin right open, and the blade sank a few inches into the flesh. The leader of the apes was both shocked and enraged. It immediately shrieked. Upon hearing this, the apes tirelessly surrounded Qinggong's group, abandoned them. They leapt up the cavern walls, changing their target to Shen Qiao. The apes weren't only agile and capable of powerful attacks, they also possessed hides as strong as steel. Normal weapons couldn't scratch them at all. Even Shan Tongbei could only harm them when infused with true chi. If it had been a one-on-one match, Shen Qiao could have fought without fear, but with a dozen of them pouncing on him instead, even with a grandmaster, the likes of Buddha Master Zhu Ting, they would have been overwhelmed. He immediately withdrew his sword and retreated, but now he'd wounded the leader of the apes, making his escape wouldn't be so easy. Not only did it pounce at Shen Qiao, it commanded the rest of the apes to surround him as one. When Murongchen saw that Shen Qiao had drawn the apes away, he quickly said to Qinggong, "My lord, let's hurry up and leave." But Qinggong said, "No, go help him!" Murongchen was a little dismayed. "My lord." Qinggong frowned. "We're all in the same boat. Shen Qiao has been of great help to us, so we must help him if we can." With that, he leapt upward with his sword. Having no choice, Murongchen and the others gritted their teeth and followed. However, the ape leader loathed Shen Qiao for injuring it, and was determined to rip him into pieces. Under the threat of their leader, the other apes were also uninterested in fighting Qinggong's group. They all rushed towards Shen Qiao. If anything, Qinggong's interference only made them more frenzied and agitated. Completely unafraid of death, so much so that the moment Qinggong's attention slipped, a deep slash enough to show the bone gored into his arm. When he saw this, Murongchen yelled out in a panic, "My lord!" He rushed over to administer medicine to Qinggong, while the others shrank back at the sight of his injury. Shen Qiao had no connections with them in the first place. Even though he was in a tight spot now due to wanting to capture the leader first, it also happened to resolve their crisis as well. Murongchen spoke to Qinggong in a hushed voice, "My lord, there is no time to lose. Once those demon apes kill Shen Qiao, they will turn to us, and we will be in trouble. Let's leave quickly." Qinggong was silent for a moment. Then, having made up his mind, he yelled, "Retreat!" Before they left, he turned his head back and up. In the midst of the apes' frenzied, frightening shrieks, those few blazing sword glares shone fiercely. But they also gave the impression of stranded helplessness. It was impossible to say how much longer Shen Qiao would last. Qinggong withdrew his gaze, and then left with Murongchen and the others, never glancing back. As Shen Qiao killed two of the apes, he indeed began to grow fatigued. After all, his martial art abilities had not fully recovered. Furthermore, those apes seemed to have gone mad. One after another, they threw themselves at the sword chi without any sense of self-preservation. But his sword chi couldn't last forever. Shen Qiao slashed open a long cut in one chest of the ape, and its blood splattered his face, the nauseating stench slamming into him alongside. Even Shen Qiao's movements couldn't be helped but pause at this. While the other apes were attacking Shen Qiao, the leader had been biding his time, waiting for its chance. Now that it had managed to glimpse one, it howled and leapt at Shen Qiao, grabbing him while shoving him backwards. The ape was holding him tightly. Shen Qiao couldn't struggle free. His entire body was forced to fall back, and he lost his footing, falling into a deep pit. Right at this moment, the leader of the apes released him. As the other apes grabbed it by the tail, it viciously shoved Shen Qiao into the pit, and then gave a loud roar as if they were celebrating their victory. Carrying Shen Qiao's weight, Shan Tongbei scored a long trail of sparks in the wall. But Shen Qiao still couldn't stop his descent. The pit seemed like a real abyss. He had no idea how long it would take to reach the bottom. His arm was growing numb and sore, and every single wound upon his body was hurting. He'd been injured while fighting the apes, and at this point he could feel a burning, excruciating agony. Shen Qiao looked down. Below him glowed a faint red. He didn't know what it was. He'd already lost all feeling within his arm. In a moment of carelessness, Shen Qiao left the wall, and his entire person plummeted downward. But this plummet had just started when someone firmly grabbed him by the other arm. Shen Qiao lifted his head and saw that Yan Wushi had somehow appeared. In order to grab onto Shen Qiao, his entire upper half was over the edge. "Hold on tight," he said to Shen Qiao, his voice severe. Oh, okay. Chapter 65, poisoned. This is, whew. With this buffer, Shen Qiao was able to catch his breath. He's forcefully jammed Shen Qiao into the wall while his feet caught a jutting crack. Drawing a deep breath, he flipped himself upward to where Yan Wushi was hiding. This place wasn't a true cave. Instead, it was a crack in the stone wall that had become a fissure due to its age. Buried by the wind and sand, baptized by the slow march of years, the city had long become part of the underground itself. Before he could ask, Yan Wushi said, "Down there should be the red carnelian that Qinggong is after." Earlier, Shen Qiao had had his hands full trying to secure himself, so he hadn't paid much attention. Now, as he looked down, he realized there was a sea of glimmering red beneath him. If they'd been in broad daylight, the red shine wouldn't have been particularly dazzling, as it was only light from the ore itself. But it was lustrous, translucent, and beautiful, and in the darkness, it was enough to cast their faces in a crimson glow. I love the descriptions. It's so good. From here all the way to the front, the winding passage twisted and turned. Carnelian deposits illuminated their surroundings on the left and right, but they were all buried deep within the rocks. There was no way to dig them out. They were indeed beautiful. But what did Qinggong need them for? The Emperor of Qi favored him greatly, showering him with endless riches and glory. Even RuoQiang was willing to serve him, loyal and steadfast, to say nothing of the money and treasures he must possess. The Qinggong of the past had nothing, so perhaps he'd been willing to risk his life for the carnelian, but current Qinggong had too much. Why would he still come here despite all the dangers? Could he have another goal? Shen Qiao thought that the Qinggong he'd reunited with had long changed completely as a person. He couldn't use his old insight to appraise his schemes and cunning now. He withdrew his gaze and looked back. "Many thanks. Why are you here?" Yan Wushi didn't answer the question. "There's a path here that leads underground." Shen Qiao was surprised. "You already went down?" "I didn't get too close. There were 2 apes guarding it nearby." "Then did you see the jade sistanch?" Yan Wushi gave an affirmation. Shen Qiao briefly inspected his own condition. He had about a dozen wounds, both large and small, scattered over his body. Most of them were cuts inflicted by the apes back when he'd been protecting Yan Wushi, but there were also scrapes and bruises from his fall. However, these were all flesh wounds. The poison on the ape's claw was also a mild one, and he quickly expelled it by circulating his true qi. In comparison, the injuries Qinggong's group had suffered were quite a bit more severe. Those apes had lived here for hundreds of years without seeing the light of day, all while consuming the human-faced spiders and jade sistanch. Their hides are like iron. Weapons cannot hurt them unless infused with true qi, and their bodies are like light as a swallow. That's what makes them so difficult to deal with. But Shen Qiao's spirits actually rose. "Well, let's go then. Since we're already here, we might as well go the full way. Once we have the jade sistanch, we'll be able to soon heal your external injuries." Yan Wushi glanced at him. "Do you need to rest?" Shen Qiao shook his head. "Let's grab the jade sistanch first, lest we meet with Qinggong's group again and more problems arise." Yan Wushi nodded and didn't add more. "Come with me." He stood and began walking, leading the way as Shen Qiao followed behind him. As they left the stretch of carnelian, the red glow faded and their path was once again plunged into the darkness. They moved as lightly as possible, the sound of their breaths mingling with the rustling of their clothes. But their actual silhouettes remained separate, with the one in front and the other in the back, intimate in impression yet estranged in reality. This prose, y'all. It wasn't a short distance, and there were quite a few twists and turns along the way, but as Yan Wushi had already walked it once, his pace was fairly brisk. After about 15 minutes, he suddenly halted. Fortunately, Shen Qiao reacted quickly and came to a stop immediately. Otherwise, he would have ran into him. Yan Wushi looked back and said quietly, "Right in front of us is..." Before he could finish, a stench assailed them from the front. Shen Qiao yanked Yan Wushi behind himself and then raised a sword in his right hand to block. A massive weight suddenly slammed down from above. Taken by surprise, Shen Qiao was forced back 3 steps, but he quickly drew his sword and slashed at it. The ape shrieked and leaped back, then quickly pounced over again. At the same time, another ape also leapt into the fray. Entrenched within the darkness, Shen Qiao couldn't see, but his other senses sharpened. He backed up a few steps, waiting until those apes left over together, and then channeled his true qi into the blade and transformed it into a white arc. Caught off guard, the apes screamed in pain as they were slashed by the edge before immediately attacking Shen Qiao with even more vehemence. Shen Qiao said to Yan Wushi, "I'll hold him here. You go get the jade cistanch." Even before he'd said so, Yan Wushi had already bent over and was pulling up multiple bunches of those white, palm-shaped fruit growing within the narrow fissure above the carnelian. They looked a little like aloe vera, and though they should have been white, the light from the carnelian cast them in a faint red glow. When they were snapped, a milky white liquid flowed out, accompanied by a subtle fragrance. Legend said that jade cistanch was incredibly precious, miraculous at healing wounds. Even the imperial palaces might not have had any. But after plucking a couple, Yan Wushi didn't give the rest a single glance. Instead, he turned to look at the carnelian beneath the cliff before doing something entirely unexpected. He pulled out all of the jade cistanch that had already fruited and destroyed them, and then threw them off the cliff. The cistanch quickly vanished amid the sea of red light. The sound of hurried footsteps came from the other end of the passage. Qinggong's party had managed to rid themselves of the apes with great difficulty, only to encounter more human-faced spiders. After another brief struggle, the apes had caught up, and they were forced to dash onward while fighting. Now that they'd arrived, believing they'd found the light at the end of the tunnel, they'd never imagined a reunion with old friends, Taoist Master Shen! Qinggong's tone was both astonished and doubtful. He thought there was no way Shen Qiao could have survived the apes' assault. But not only had he not died, he'd arrived here faster than they had. However, there was no time for guilty feelings or interrogation, for the apes had already caught up, and there were still 2 in the front. Qinggong's appearance caused the 2 to switch targets. They instantly took everyone to be invaders, which actually helped remove some of the burden from Shen Qiao. Qinggong's party silently bemoaned their misfortune. They thought they'd finally been able to obtain the carnelian after all their hardships. They hadn't imagined there'd be another fierce battle up ahead. The apes were unrelenting and ferocious. If they didn't eliminate them completely, they wouldn't be able to leave, let alone get their hands on the carnelian. Everyone had no choice but to draw their weapons and tussle with the apes. However, there was one small stroke of fortune. The apes weren't indestructible. Having fought with Qinggong and his men for so long, they were also getting fatigued. Soon, Shen Qiao and RuoQiang each sliced open an ape's throat, killing them. The apes had long gained a human-like disposition. Grieved by the deaths of their own, they were also a little afraid and tried to retreat. Only the ape leader flew into a rage, attacking them in an even greater frenzy. Despite its fury, the leader was already in disarray, and after fighting the apes for so long, everyone had slowly begun to grasp some tricks, instead of merely trying to muscle through with force. The neck was the softest and weakest part of the ape. As long as one could find the chance to pierce it with their sword, even if the blow didn't decapitate the ape, it would still slice open its throat and kill it. Within half an hour, a fair number of apes had died by their blades. Seeing their victory imminent, Qinggong slowly left the circle of battle and walked towards the cliff. The carnelian lay only 30 or so yards below the cliff. To those skilled in Qinggong, the height was no trouble at all. Qinggong had journeyed a great distance here from Qi's capital just for this. And he'd almost even lost his life along the way. Now that he could see his final goal right before his eyes, he couldn't help but grow excited. He composed himself, tossing aside all useless emotions, then turned back to glance at RuoQiang and the others. Out of everyone who'd followed him here, there were only 3 people left, not counting Qinggong himself. They were RuoQiang and his nephew, RuoQiang, as well as a man named Sa Kunpeng. The 3 of them had been the best martial artists out of the bunch, but they were all still fighting the apes and barely able to keep up. Qinggong lacked the patience to wait until they could take a look, so he jumped down the cliff wall himself. There were no apes or spiders down below. It was all carnelian, sprouting in clusters of crystals. Their red glow wasn't blinding, nor did it remind him of blood. Instead, it actually gave off a faint sense of harmonious peace. Qinggong couldn't contain his excitement. He reached out to touch them. The crystal surface was smooth and translucent, reflecting even the outline of his fingers. Only after a moment did his excited feelings slowly calm down. Qinggong looked around himself. These naturally formed crystals were incomparably hard and couldn't be easily removed. To do so would probably require dozens, even hundreds of men chipping away at them with an axe. But Qinggong had no intention of taking the carnelian with him. It was true that they were priceless, but that had never been his goal. He untied the Tai sword upon his back, and then looked for a carnelian crystal with the sharpest edge. He pressed the sword to the carnelian, right where the hilt connected to the blade. With a quiet click, the hilt separated from the blade. Just like that, he'd broken a legendary sword that had been passed down the generations into two. But an expression of joy came over Qinggong's face. He threw the blade aside and then carefully removed a small piece of silk from a hollow within the hilt. The silk was crammed full of words. Qinggong looked at it for a while, and the joy on his face became brighter and brighter. He simply stood among the carnelian as he began to carefully read. However, after a moment, his expression suddenly filled with alarm. He looked down to see the palm of his right hand had already turned a bruised purple without his notice, and it was slowly spreading up his arm. A prickling pain accompanied it as it traveled, an itchiness within the agony that made him want to scratch at it. And Qinggong did, but it didn't stop the itchiness. He scratched until it bled, but to no avail. Oh my God! Beneath the skin, it felt like thousands of insects were biting at him, painful and itching beyond enduring. His veins began to protrude, sprawling upwards in the direction of the blood flow, all while slowly spreading towards his wrist. Qinggong didn't need to someone to tell him that he'd been poisoned. There was no time to be concerned about anything else. He climbed back up the cliff wall a few leaps, returned to the original passage. At this time, RuoQiang and Shen Qiao had managed to kill over half the apes, forcing the leader to retreat, while Yan Wushi had somehow found a mechanism within the wall. A massive boulder came crashing down to seal off the passage, and everyone took the chance to back up. The boulder separated them from the apes, letting the entire group pause to catch their breaths. But Qinggong was completely preoccupied with the fact that he'd been poisoned, and he had no time to spare for the apes. RuoQiang saw his terrified expression and quickly ran over to support him. "Quick, hurry! Do you have any antidotes on you?" RuoQiang's gaze landed on his palm, and he couldn't conceal his alarm. "My lord, is this—" The purplish blue color had already begun to creep over his wrist. Qinggong was practically roaring by now. "Antidote!" He'd taken quite a few at the bottom of the cliff, but they were all ineffective. Now he could only place all of his hopes on RuoQiang. But no antidote could cure everything. Anything RuoQiang had on him, Qinggong had also certainly had. After swallowing down a great many pills to no avail, Qinggong was already on the brink of despair. He didn't expect that after staking everything on achieving his goal, he would lose his life over something like this. "Does Taoist Master Shen have a method to cure this poison?" he said hoarsely. As if Shen Qiao were his final hope, he gazed on him full of desperate anticipation. Shen Qiao didn't even have any idea how he'd been poisoned in the first place. All he saw was Qinggong jumping down the cliff, and the next thing he knew, he returned poison. Is there something poisonous down there? It's the carnelian. That's why the spiders and apes weren't on it. I was wondering. It's the carnelian. The carnelian is incredibly toxic. Do you know how to save me? I heard that Jean Dumont was also peerless when it came to refining medicine, and you were the sect leader, so you must know all about all sorts of cures. If you could save me, I'll give you everything I have in return. Shen Qiao shook his head. I left in a hurry and came here under duress. There was no time for me to bring anything like an antidote. But Qinggong only thought him unwilling. He fished out a piece of jade from his lapel and tossed it to Shen Qiao. In truth, back when you agreed to travel with us, I ordered someone to free that old man. By now, he must already be back home with his granddaughter. If you're still worried once you get back, you can take this jade to Yanlai Inn within the capital and ask for him. I paid the innkeeper to hold the old man there temporarily. Even if he hasn't let him go, if you bring this piece of jade to the innkeeper, you can have him released. I know that you're an upright gentleman. You've saved my life many times before as well. I only had you come on this trip this time because I had no other choice. I never intended to hurt anyone. Please, for the sake of our old friendship, save me." He spoke incredibly quickly. One could imagine just how panicked he was. Shen Qiao said helplessly, "I truly have no antidote." The moment he said this, Qinggong's face turned the color of ash. He tried to expel the poison through circulating his true qi, but that only seemed to hasten his encroachment even further. Seeing the bluish color was about to reach his elbow, Qinggong gritted his teeth and then said to RuoQiang, "Quick, cut off my arm!" This is why Yan Wushi threw out the cistanch, so he couldn't use it. I bet that's what he did. But right at that moment, Yan Wushi suddenly spoke up from where he'd been silently hiding in the dark the entire while. "Why don't you ask me if I have any ideas?" "You bitch! Oh my things. One, the audio drama spoils some things, so we're gonna get to that. I mean, I was kind of suspecting it as we were reading, and I was like, I wonder if that's what that might be, and then it confirms it, so we're gonna get to that. But two, it cannot be understated. There was no picture this week, which is very sad, but having watched and read Heaven Official's Blessing, I kind of have an idea of what the spiders look like. But it cannot be understated that this writing is so good. Listen, our translator, Felicity, you've done amazing work because the prose in this book is so good. There were moments reading that I was like, damn, that's a really good line. That's a really good description. That's a really good line. I wanted to stop and point it out, and I'm going to talk about them, like some of the ones I see here as we're going back through these chapters. But, also, having been in many a dungeon crawl scene in a Danmai, this is the creepiest one. This is the creepiest one so far. This was legitimately scary. Like, there was a way that it was written that it felt so claustrophobic. It felt so much like they were just groping in the dark trying to figure out where they were. The spiders were terrifying. The monkeys, nope. And so, and I think the worst part of it is that it wasn't anything supernatural. I think that was kind of, because again, I've read Heaven Official's Blessing and Modao Zushi, and in those series, the things that are kind of scary or creepy are very supernatural, like they're spiritual or they're ghosts or something like this. These were tangible, real things. Like, these were real spiders, real monkeys that were very strong because they developed these, like, evolutionary adaptations over hundreds of years, and they were a legitimate threat. And I was like, and we started out with so many, and now we're down to 3 guys, Qinggong, Shen Qiao, and Yan Wushi. We got 6 people left in the cave, and we started out with like 30. So they just dropping like flies, and Qinggong's poisoned himself, and like the ultimate act of you could not write more hubris into Qinggong's actions in this chapter set. I was like, oh, now it makes sense why we came here from the start. Now it all, because the mystery of like, why come out in the middle of nowhere to find these, like, to find this Cardinalian and find, like, why do that? Now it all makes sense. And it's like, aha. So I've got some notes from the audio drama that are up here. The audio drama episode was great. I've got some notes. There are some, like, word translation changes that I think are very worth noting. And then there's also a part that's spoiled. But I'm sure we're going to find it out next week. I have a theory now that I know what I know. So I have a theory at the end of this that we're going to kind of tease for next week. But I think I know where they're headed with it. But for getting through 4 chapters, I was like, there was a couple chapters that were really short. And I was like, man, we are booking through these. Like, is this going to be I like looked up at one point and I was like 30 minutes into the reading. And I was like, this is going to be a short video this week. And then we got to the spiders. And then we slowed down significantly. And I was like, oh, that's what we're getting into. But yeah, well, let's talk about these chapters. So chapter 62 is the only one in the world. You can frame that however you want to. If it's talking about RuoQiang and the Carnelian, if it's talking about there's only one Shen Qiao in the whole wide world, there's lots of Qinggongs, but only one Shen Qiao. I think that's what it's talking about, is that Yan Wushi or Ayan makes the note in this chapter that there's many people like Qinggong in the world, but there's only one person as kind as Shen Qiao, and Shen Qiao's like, quit, stop. So let's talk about this. So this whole falling, like the sandstorm and falling to the trap door that leads to RuoQiang, and it's this like underground city that's been kind of buried in a tomb for hundreds of years with these spiders and monkeys that have become natural enemies and evolved to be poisonous and terrifying. Absolutely not. Like, this was legitimately scary. Like, reading this, I was like, I don't like this. I was like, oh, this is actually terrifying. I'm not much of a horror reader, but I was like, ooh. It gave me lots of chills. I was like, nope. But yeah, so them all falling down. And the fact that most of the people they came in contact with in this chapter are dead. So there's that. So Yan Wushi, of course, falls down there, dislocates his arm. Shen Qiao has to help him get up and everything. And he's like, we'll just walk together and we'll find Shen Gong. And then here we go. And they're like, well, they figure out they're at RuoQiang. They're like, I think we found the place we were meaning to go to the entire time. How convenient. Wonderful. The whole thing with the torches, that they were running out of torches and they couldn't see. And at first, in context of the story, it's okay because Shen Qiao's used to being blind this whole time. So it actually works to his advantage. It's really smart of the author to have your character start out blind. So when they get in situations like this, it's not, it feels realistic that Shen Qiao would be okay. The scary part is that now, even if you are blind, you don't know where to go and you've never been here before and there could be traps. And like, even the sword and stuff coming up, I was like, I was surprised there wasn't like booby traps, but I guess the apes and the spiders are good enough to take care of it. And then that line from Yan Wushi where he's like, it doesn't look like a person. I was like, nope. That's where we go. That's where we go. So we have this conversation in chapter 62 as they're walking. I think it's very notable in this chapter set that at no point are the two of them side by side walking and talking. It's one in front of the other. So there was a line that was written in this novel that was beautiful in describing it. When we get to it, I'll read it out loud, but describing how they're very separate at this moment still, but they're like in tiny little IV doses, just slowly trickling and getting to know each other. And so Ayan, the audio drama labels him as Ayan. He, asks him, he's like, do you feel any hatred for what Yan Wushi has done to you? And it's a different kind of conversation because before, Shiwu asked this question and Shen Qiao didn't really want to answer him because she was a kid. He's not connected to Yan Wushi, all this. Well, now you're literally talking to his like doppelganger personality. You might as well be honest. And so, Shen Qiao's like, no. He's like, I do feel resentment, but not hatred. He's like, and Shen Qiao has the whole thing where he's like, life's too short for me to hold grudges. It's water under the bridge. I've got too much. He's like, I'd rather focus on the good people than the bad. And I really love the way that Shen Qiao frames it. He's like, while you delivered me to Song Zhijing and left me with no choice but to forsake my martial arts and perish with them. And Ayan's like, well, that wasn't actually me, but okay. Shen Qiao gets a little tinge there where he's like, I could have focused on all the horrible things that, your alter personality did to me, but instead I was focusing on the abbot and above the priest and above the two Chiwu and Chuyi. He's like, I chose to focus on them. And I love that he is able to tell Ayan that Shiwu is the kid that they saved. He's like, so see, even though there's lots of bad things that happen, I choose to focus on the little acts of good because those are what make the world a better place. And I don't want to focus on the hatred. He's like, I only have so much room in my heart. I really like it. There's another series called Jujutsu Kaisen, and there's a conversation between two characters where they talk about only having so many chairs at the table. And they're like, I only have so much room in my entourage for the people that matter to me. And the people that don't fit at that table that I've constructed that I care about, I'm not concerned about them. Like, they may come and go, but if they don't have a permanent seat for me at my table, I'm not going to worry about them. And it kind of is a little bittersweet in this moment, which I'm glad that Shen Qiao frames it this way, because Ayan says, what about Yan Wushi? Do you hate him? And Shen Qiao frames it as, if he wasn't important to saving the world to me, we wouldn't be having this conversation because I wouldn't have gone to such lengths to save him. It's just because I know the value that he has to save the world. And in the novel, Yan Wushi laughs, or Ayan laughs, and he says, in truth, you do hold hatred, but you're too forgiving and soft-hearted, so your hatred doesn't last long. In the audio drama, I like the way they phrased it. They said, Ah Chow, it's true that you do still hate him, but you're too kind to hate anyone for long. I love the way that is phrased. I like that Ayan's like, no, you still hate him. You hate what he did, but you're just not holding any grudges, but you're not going to light a torch for him. And I'm glad because Yan Wushi was a terrible person. Shen Qiao should not be expected to forgive him and love him, but Ayan is a different version of him, so it makes it more complicated, So In any case, I really liked their conversation. And so Shen Qiao's like, I really do believe that you're not him, because Yan Wushi would never say something like that. And so, in any case, as they're about to go down, there is this one conversation where he says, they have this, it's extended in the audio drama a little bit. And Shen Qiao is like, are you suggesting that I only care about you tossing you aside? Is that right? And Ayan says, no, I understand why you treated me, why that version of me treated you in such a way. So there's a conversation that Shen Qiao has in the audio drama with Ayan where he kind of explains it a little bit further. And so, yeah, Shen Qiao says it here. He says, I could have done that, but if I did, you'd have no way to escape. Are you saying I should have just left you behind? In the audio drama, he says, are you suggesting I only toss you aside? Like what Yan Wushi would suggest. And Ayan says, no, I understand why that my previous self treated you the way that he did. He's a paranoid person at heart, someone who would never trust anyone. No matter how good you are, he'd always want to bring out the darkness hidden within you. In the audio drama, he says he never has had faith in any person, which is why he always wanted to drag out the darkness from the depths of your heart. Yet he didn't know that you are the person that you are. In the novel, he says there's hundreds of Chen Gongs, but there's only one Shen Qiao. He doesn't know that you are you. Which is so interesting because Shen Qiao, that's been his whole MO, has been to show Yan Wushi that he is still him and to express it. But Ayan is kind of suggesting, he's like, Yan Wushi doesn't get it. He doesn't get that you are you and that he can keep trying all he wants and it's not going to work. So I'm glad that in both the audio drama and the novel, they kind of addressed that and pointed out. There was a cute little emoji whenever Shen Qiao is like, don't you have a headache? How can you talk so much? There's like a little emoji and it was of Yan Wushi, of Ayan, like sweating, like, ah. It was really cute. I loved it in the audio drama. It was great. So then they circle back around. Toba Liangje, R.I.P., he shows up. One of the apes attacks and he gets drugged down into the abyss, and Yan Wushi, as we start chapter 63, is spared, but he's exhausted, so he ends up, just riding on, Shen Qiao's back. Which again, calling back to that cave scene after RuoQiang's fight, Shen Qiao's like, I don't think that Yan Wushi would let me do this, but as he's carrying him up the stairs, as he's walking, the audio drama was really good. They had this moment where Yan Wushi's like, I'm not that Ayan of yours. And I was like, ooh, the of yours got me. Because in the novel, he's like, I'm not Ayan. In the audio drama, he says, I'm not that Ayan of yours. Which means, like, the way he says it, you can just feel, like, even though it's translated, you can feel that version of Yan Wushi saying, like, you've developed this attachment to Ayan. Which, I mean, it hasn't come out and said that Shen Qiao has, but I wouldn't blame him if he has, because Ayan is essentially what Shen Qiao has wanted out of Yan Wushi that whole time. So, I mean, I wouldn't blame him if he had developed an attachment to him, but he doesn't seem to have. Shen Qiao keeps everything close to the vest. He doesn't seem to have. But the way that he describes him, and Shen Qiao's like, I know. So he asks which personality he is. He's like, who are you right now? And Yan Wushi's like, I'm him, but I'm also not him. He's like, I don't know. And then he talks about things like, he's like, I don't even know the things I did a moment ago. I might do something and become completely unaware of it. Which is kind of a scary situation, honestly. There is an interesting angle with Yan Wushi losing some of his autonomy, which is interesting. And I never thought we would be here having these different versions of him kind of sift in and out. But Shen Qiao's trying to like navigate like, well, if this is not Ayan and it's not Yan Wushi and it's not Xiling, who is he? It's so fascinating. It's like there's all these different facets of Yan Wushi's personality that are coming out. And we don't exactly know how many there are or who they are or how it works. And so he says that he's going to wait until he patches the flaw in the Fanglin scriptures. And Shen Qiao's like, didn't you say there was no way to do this? And Yan Wushi's like, yes, I have found the method. It's like, okay, sure. I like that Shen Qiao's like, okay, sure, Jan, sure. And so there is this moment here where in the audio drama, he says, like, Shen Qiao is like, well, didn't you say there wasn't a way to fix it? And in the audio drama, Yan Wushi responds, you still want to help me, don't you? And there's a moment where you can kind of feel it in his voice where Yan Wushi's like, you haven't learned. You haven't learned that I'm not somebody you should want to help because I'm a terrible person. Like, you can feel it in his voice as he says it. And that's when he's like, in the audio drama, he says, I've already found a way. That's why I came here. So whatever that's going to end up, I'm like, you kind of didn't have a choice to come here. Shen Qiao kind of drug you along because Qin Gong, like, you know, framed him and blackmailed him, but okay. All right. Now, as chapter 64 starts, which is just called Exhausted, which I don't know how these people are still moving or standing because at this point it's like, how could they? Like, this battle was insane. This battle was crazy. I want to see if I can find that line. There was a line about them being together but apart. I wish I could find that. It was really good about them being on the stairs. I don't know if it was them. Well, he's carrying him on his back, so I don't know if that exactly will work out. Maybe we'll get it in this chapter here. But yeah, chapter 64 is called Exhausted. And Shen Qiao and Yan Wushi start to meet up with everybody else. And this never-ending staircase, it seems to go forever. And so, yeah, there's this moment where, you know, Shen Qiao, he starts to, like, kind of, like, drift off and, like, lose track of things because of, like, the staleness of the air. And Yan Wushi, like, puts his cold hand up against his nape to kind of snap him back. And he's like, many thanks. But this Yan Wushi doesn't reply because he's not Ayan, right? And he's like, the true chi is in disorder. The current one probably didn't want to talk or like to talk. But yeah, there's this, like, it's so good the way they describe it. It's so freaking good. I love it. But anyway, they run across Chu Ping. R.I.P. Chu Ping. R.I.P. everyone, literally, in this chapter, because these spiders kill all of them. The spiders sucking their blood out to the point that their husks and corpses could do without. Just like, no! There are creatures in Heaven Official's Blessing who are monstrous and have human faces on them, and they're animalistic. So the human face spiders is terrifying. The ape leader having a human face, sure thing. Okay, that was scary as well. But yeah, so Qin Gong, we find out he took the sword he got into these caves. And we're going to find out why we're after the Carnelian. The moment that they were talking about the apes, I love the fact that I feel as if the author was like, look, we're not going to make them fight the apes and the spiders both at the same time. That's overkill. They would definitely die. So they make them evolutionary rivals where the spiders are never there when the apes are there. And it works out really well. But every time, the moment they showed up with the Carnelian, we'll talk about it when we get there. But the moment that they showed up at the Carnelian, I was like, oh, there's no spiders and there's no apes around the Carnelian. So I wonder why they're not on it. Maybe because it's poisonous. And it turns out to be poisonous and highly toxic. So Qin Gong led them to this highly toxic, deadly cave for his own hubris and own reasons. So we'll get into that. But yeah, so then the spiders, just terrifying. No, thank you. Also, R.I.P. Liu Long. R.I.P. to him, too. The whole writing is just terrifying. It was just so terrifying. And the idea of, like, cutting them and then babies come out and they just start crying. No, absolutely not. Nope. Parasitic bugs are, like, one of my worst fears. This whole chapter was terrifying. And then the demon monkeys come back. Oh, my God. So there's this moment where Shen Qiao realizes that he can't keep protecting Yan Wushi while fighting off the apes and the spiders at the same time. There is a moment in the audio drama, so Yan Wushi speaks up and says that the apes are the spiders' natural enemies. Once they appear, the spiders retreated. In the audio drama, you get Yan Wushi up against your ear, seductively saying, your swordsmanship has improved to Shen Qiao. And I'm like, you need to stop, sir. I was like, no! So I feel like Shen Qiao, like I'm rooting for them as a couple, but we have so far to go before Shen Qiao is even remotely, they haven't even developed. Here's the thing. This whole volume so far is setting the stage for Yan Wushi and Shen Qiao to be able to develop a relationship, to have the ability, but we are nowhere near that. We got volumes 4 and 5 yet to worry about before we even dive anywhere close to that. But yeah, so him being like, your swordsmanship's gotten so much better. I'm like, stop it. It's great. So anyway, during this whole fight, Shen Qiao tells Yan Wushi, he tells him to go and hide by Oooohhh, and he's like, I'll look for the leader and then I'll come back. And I love that Yan Wushi is like, screw that idea. I love that Yan Wushi is like, you think I'm going to stand next to this guy? Hell no. What point? Why do I have a reason for that? And so he like skinks into the shadows. Like, for a man that is on death's door, he's doing pretty damn good for himself. But he slinks away and hides in the shadows so he can be a Deus Ex Machina at the right moment to save our boy Shen Qiao from falling to his death. So there's that. The green eyes of the apes are such a good detail. It's so good. And I want to make note. We go back and talk about Shi Lian and about kindness towards others having an impact. At the beginning, whenever they see that Shen Qiao is getting surrounded by all these apes and he's possibly going to lose, in that moment, Qin Gong tells Oooohhh, he's like, we're going to go save him. We're going to go help him if we can. And that's exactly the pay it forward attitude that Shen Qiao was talking about. The sad thing is that Shen Qiao doesn't get to see that in action because they get closer and it becomes too overwhelming. And then Qin Gong doesn't have a choice. He has to retreat. In the audio drama, they just have him retreating. They don't have him go through this little moral crisis. He just retreats. But it's really sad because Shen Qiao's words were true. And then it got overwhelming and they had to retreat. And it was like, man, it would have been just nice if he could have seen that Qin Gong was trying to help him, but then just got overwhelmed and couldn't do it. So anyway, we go back to Shen Qiao, and as he falls, that's when Yan Wushi catches him. Now, Yan Wushi catches him and saves him. So he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to do that. He could have let Shen Qiao fall to his death. He really could have. But he didn't. He saved him. So we're establishing all that. So we have chapter 65, which is called Poisoned. And they manage... everything is so... like the idea of like the casting the crimson glow on them as they walk around the different clusters of carnelian. The writing in this is so beautiful. Like the opening of chapter 65 is gorgeous, the way that they write it. And so then Shen Qiao is asking like, why is Qin Gong trying to find this carnelian? They established a carnelian is like stuck deep within the mountain. They're like, you'd need guys hacking at this away with picks and axes for days before they could harvest any of it. And it's highly toxic, so that's not going to happen. So he's like, why in the world would he come all this way to access this stone that he can't actually cultivate? What's his other goal? We're going to find out here shortly. But yeah, so they managed to find the cystitch. They managed to find it. And he's like, well, let's go. We're already here. Just grab the cystanch and you'll be able to heal your injuries. Now, Yan Wushi prefaces. He did ask Shen Qiao, he's like, do you need to rest? He asked him. He put the question out there and Shen Qiao's like, no, we're good. And Yan Wushi's like, okay. So he says after they left the stench of the carnelian, Yan Wushi walked it once, his pace fairly brisk, and after 15 minutes he halted. He's like right in front. Okay, so the stench is of the ape. But where's that part here? He says they inspected his own condition. He had about a dozen wounds and the poison, which he manages to get away with his true chi. So I wanted to say, like, where's the part where he talks about what he does with the cystanch? As he's battling the ape, we see Yan Wushi bending over and pulling up multiple bunches of the white palm-shaped fruit growing within the narrow fissure of the carnelian, above the carnelian. And so, you know, it's the milky white liquid that flows out that's of, you know, use. So after plucking a couple, he didn't give the rest a single glance. Instead, he turned to look at the carnelian beneath the cliff before doing something utterly unexpected. He pulled out all the jade cistanch that had already been fruited and destroyed them and threw them off the cliff. And they vanished amidst the sea of red light. In the audio drama, it establishes that Yan Wushi did take a couple of the fruit for himself and he threw the rest into the ruins. Now, is that Yan Wushi being a bitch? Yes. He saved a couple for himself and maybe Shilian if he's feeling like it. But everybody else, y'all screwed. Y'all ain't getting nothing. So I'm like, ooh! Now I think he's going to do something with that fruit. I think it's going to be interesting, but I think he's going to do something with it. I could be totally wrong because we're about to get to this part here. So Qin Gong shows up along with Murong Qin and Murong Qin's like nephew and this one guy that's left over that we'll get here. So Sa Kunpeng and Murong Jun are like the others that are with him that are left over. So they're all fighting these apes. And then Qin Gong slips off. This part was so fascinating to me because we very rarely get the perspective of a character that's not Shen Qiao and we go off with them on their own. We've done it with Yan Wushi like maybe once or twice in the novel. We've done it a lot in the other versions. And we've done it maybe with Qin Gong a little bit, but like we rarely get to follow a character off to another location. And Qin Gong, we follow him down to the crystals. And so he's like, he had no intention of taking the carnelian with him. They were priceless, but that wasn't his goal. So he takes a Tai A sword and he clicks the hilt away from it. And there's a small piece of silk from the hollow. Now, in the audio drama, the piece of silk is revealed to be what I was wondering what it was, especially why he was so happy about it. And I was like, I wonder if this piece of silk is the other Zhu strategy. And the audio drama confirms that it is. I was like, you're spoiling audio drama. You are spoiling us. So he starts to say a bunch of lines from the script as he's like unfolding it. I was like, audio drama, you are spoiling what is happening. But I feel like we're going to talk about it next week because my theory is Qin Gong needs an antidote. Yan Wushi saved a couple of those cistanches. And I wonder if Yan Wushi's like, so what do you got there from that sword? I'll trade you the silk for the cistanch so he can get the copy of the Zhiyong strategy. I think he's going to try to trade him a copy of the Zhiyong strategy for the actual cistanch, but I could be wrong. I think he's going to try to trade it so he can read it, or he's going to give it to him with the trade being that they can read it. I could be wrong. Now, why Qin Gong wants the Zhiyong strategy? I mean, he knows how famous it is, so there's probably a reason for that, but that remains to be seen. I just couldn't believe the audio drama just came out and said it. I mean, I get it. It's the audio drama, but I thought it was going to be it. But anyway, so just the hubris that Qin Gong was willing to risk his own health to walk down and try to claim the Zhiyong strategy for himself amidst all of the poison. The hubris of humanity knows no bounds, right? But yeah, and then the whole thing is like, he's like, oh, well, Shen Qiao, you're from Zhangdu Mountain and you all specialize in medicine. So I thought, you being here, you could help me. And Shen Qiao's like, no. It's like really terrifying. So the question is Qin Gong going to get saved? Is he going to be saved by Yan Wushi? I love that Yan Wushi like speaks up and he's like, why don't you ask me if I have any ideas? And it's like, I mean, if it's depending on which version of Yan Wushi it is, the Yan Wushi that we know would just probably take the scroll and like let him die. But depending on which version it is, it's going to be like, okay, what's the catch? What are you going to want? I think he's going to want the scroll. Somebody needs to take that Zhiyong strategy guide. Qin Gong's got it out. So is it just going to get lost in the carnelian? Like, what's going to happen? We found the final volume. Damn it. We finally found the final volume. Now what are we going to do with it? That remains to be seen, mother truckers. Oh, but this, oh God, this chapter set was so good. It was so good. There was this one line about them walking together, but they were like looking impressively intimate, but inextricably like disconnected from each other. Like there was a line in that text that I was like, that's so well written. Like there were so many really good lines in this writing. It was wonderful. And this battle was terrifying. And I don't like the spiders. I don't like the apes. How are they getting out of here alive? There's only 6 of them left. That remains to be seen. I'm just like, I need you to know I'm not gonna be able to wait long. As I'm recording this, the last chapter set, which was chapters 59 through 61, are just coming out on Patreon, and 56 through 58 are coming out on YouTube. So as I'm recording this, as soon as the mods give me the go-ahead to read those comments that y'all have left for those chapters, I'm going to be diving into the next set, which is going to be chapter 66 through 69, which is again 66, 67, which is again 4 more chapters. And we're going to see what we get. Like we're barely like, if I'm going through here to chapter like exhausted, that was that chapter, and then poisoned. Like at this point, we are at chapter 66. We're like almost halfway through volume 3, but we're not quite through volume 3. I love volume 3 so far. It has been by far my favorite volume, and it has been the most fascinating because it's past the Donghua, but still, Yan Wushi is giving us lots to think about. So anyway, I'm excited to hear your comments down below. I hope you enjoy the videos. Please make sure that you like the video, and please make sure you subscribe so you can join me every Monday over here on YouTube and on Patreon if you're a patron, and you'll be able to see me as I read more of Thousand Autumns. So I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more of Thousand Autumns, and I'll see you then.